This is the Telegraph Cycling Podcast, supported by Jaguar. Today we're in La Toussuire, les Sybelles.
Where are we, Lionel?
We're sheltering again from the rain. We're in a tent at La Toussuire. It's hammering down outside, and we're in the corner of the press room, staying dry.
This has been a bit of a common theme in this tour, hasn't it? We had at Plateau de Bay, somewhere else as well.
Barcelonnette, the Prelude stage. Heavens opened again today after the race finished.
Very unpleasant. It's been a dramatic day on the tour, really. Daniel's shaking his hand. So I'm with Daniel Friebe. My name's Richard Moore. I'm with Daniel Friebe.
Yeah, it's all getting very fractious. Someone said that we sounded fractious last night. It's getting fractious on the road. It's getting fractious in the press room. There's been fights between journalists today in the press room. There's been beef on the road between Nibali and Froome. It's all probably going to kick off again tomorrow. It's going to be last man standing, isn't it?
And Lionel Birnie.
Hello, Richard.
Well, I take issue with the allegation that we were fractious last night. I thought there was no tension at all last night. There is tension in the press room today. A big fight earlier on. We're going to be asked.
The police were called.
Yeah, it was quite dramatic. I was sitting a few rows back from it, trying not to get involved in any way whatsoever.
I missed all of this. I think I was having seconds from the buffet.
Thirds, I think, Lionel. Okay, let's crack on. We're, as Lionel said, we are at La Toussuire, where this has always been a dramatic place in recent years, of course. It was here in 2012 that Chris Froome rode away from Bradley Wiggins against team orders, and also in 2006 this is where Floyd Landis cracked and lost the yellow jersey and lost the tour, we thought, until his miraculous performance the following day to Morzine. We've got interviews tonight with Robbie Hunter, the South African dirt sportif at Cannondale-Garmin, talking about Chris Froome, who he knows very well from South Africa. And we've got an interview with Oleg Tinkoff.
Yeah, an exclusive with Oleg Tinkoff. He was strolling around at the start this morning, and I've asked him a few questions about his vision for the future of cycling and luxury motorhomes and various other things, yeah.
So we'll get on to that. Let's talk first of all, lads, chaps, about the stage. Vincenzo Nibali won the stage. Was very pleased to win the stage, but he attacked at a moment in the race when Chris Froome had a mechanical problem. And the big question is, did Nibali see that Froome in the yellow jersey had a mechanical problem? Chris Froome is clear, adamant, angry about it, and says that he absolutely did, and that he used his mechanical problem as an excuse to attack. Daniel, what were your thoughts?
Well, first of all, what was the mechanical problem?
He had a stone caught in his brake.
I think we've discussed this already in this tour. I mean, I think it's time to do away with these tacit agreements, codes of etiquette, whereby the equipment is considered sort of sacred ground when it comes to whether you attack or don't attack. I think that, as I've said before, when teams put so much emphasis on their equipment, riders put so much emphasis on their equipment, they poach mechanics, the best mechanics from other teams, etc. You can't then turn around the next minute and say, well, equipment's not part of the race, and bad luck's not part of the race. I think fair enough. And Froome did make a good point that, okay, Nibali wasn't directly attacking him because he can't win the race anymore, Nibali. However, that does spur Contador and Valverde into action when Nibali attacks, so it ends up effectively penalising Froome, being an attack on Froome, the way things pan out. But, we like a bit of handbags, don't we?
What did you think, Lionel?
Well, at the risk of sitting on the fence, I can see both sides. I don't see how Chris Froome can know for sure that Nibali attacked knowing that Froome had a problem. There was quite a bit of distance between the two of them on the road at the time, in the line of riders. And really, I'm coming down on the side of Daniel's argument that the Tour de France has become such a controlled event where attacks by the big guns against one another are such a rare thing to see, that if we're going to now say, well, any kind of momentary pause in the race, like a mechanical problem, or it wasn't even a mechanical problem, was it? It was a stone caught in his brake caliper. I think you should just say, well, look, the race is on. They're riding up a mountain. The race is on from the point they reach kilometre zero to the end.
And it also sets a very dangerous precedent, doesn't it? Because who's to say that Chris Froome couldn't, if he's not feeling too good and he feels like catching his breath, getting his breath back, throw your arm, mechanical, don't attack me. He could have 100 mechanicals between here and Paris if he really wanted, if he was really that desperate not to be attacked.
A crash is different. After a crash, it's certainly good sportsmanship to wait.
To check that someone's physically okay. But I think it's a different... The two things get grouped together, but I think two different issues.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that Chris Froome's anger afterwards owed quite a lot to the relationship that he has with Nibali. I think that history there is a big part of it. Now that might also be the reason that Nibali sought to take advantage of Froome's mechanical, if indeed he did see it.
The other thing is, look back at not that recent history, but when Lance Armstrong got his handlebars caught in a spectator's bag and he went down on Luzardiden, and the whole of the rest of the Tour de France favourites kind of stopped and did a bit of after you, and nobody wanted to ride on, and
that became a huge debate afterwards whether Jan Ullrich did wait or not.
Well, it did, but certainly Tyler Hamilton waited and encouraged others to slow down, and then once Armstrong caught back up to the group after a sort of just about a decent period of time, he then launched a searing attack and effectively put the race out of everybody's reach. I mean, I think once you're in the mountains and the race is on, and I think it goes back to a different era in bike racing, really, one that doesn't really exist anymore.
Jan Ullrich actually won something called the World Peace Prize, not the Nobel Prize, for that gesture, waiting for Lance Armstrong, and the prize was presented by Mikhail Gorbachev.
Fantastic. Great bit of knowledge. If Froome should have been angry and appalled at anything at the finish, it was the fact that a spectator spat at him close to the finish. And there have been a few suggestions recently that Froome didn't have a cup of urine thrown at him, as he claimed the other day. There's no doubt at all about this. This was captured on the TV by the TV cameras, and it's very clear, and the image of the perpetrator is extremely clear, and it'd be great if he could be brought to book.
Yeah, horrible incident. An adult man should know better. I mean, spitting at somebody is appalling. You do see it occasionally in football matches, and players get sent off for that. I mean, when we've talked about this relationship between the spectators and the riders, and if spectators, even if it's only one isolated incident, if they're going to step over that line, then they should be dealt with. The problem is that with social media, we do have there might be a bit of a kangaroo court or a bit of vigilantism. I mean, singling him out, yeah, fine. For his act, it's appalling, it's horrible, but we don't want to get into inflaming this whole thing, I don't think. I think just try and kind of keep it in perspective. It's an appalling thing to do, but what's to be gained by putting his picture on Twitter and saying, hunt down this man? I'm not sure. I don't know.
You've been reading John Ronson, haven't you?
Well,
although it's not quite the same. I mean, this guy, there can be no excuse for that. We also saw the rude gesture from nothing necessarily wrong with that. You're free to make whatever gesture you want to make, but it does create a sort of ugly atmosphere.
There is something slightly unsavoury about this Tour de France, isn't there? The whole climate of suspicion that surrounded it for a few days. Nibali or Froome using rude words, apparently, allegedly, at the finish today, towards Nibali. Froome going onto the Astana bus. It's all been quite undignified.
He didn't get back on the Astana bus today, did he?
I don't think so. But it has been a little bit undignified, hasn't it, the whole thing? Because we've shown some decorum throughout the 2.5 weeks, generally, in the way we've conducted ourselves.
Should just clarify, I'm not in any way saying that the guy who spat at Chris Froome should get away with it, but I just think that I feel uncomfortable. Like you say, I have read John Ronson's book about public shaming and the way that particularly social media hunts people down and singles them out, and I mean, that guy really needs to have a quiet sort of conversation with himself about whether what he did was acceptable. And really, it's if the police want to get involved and say, look, we're gonna identify that guy from the TV footage, that's a different matter, but the mob rule I'm not comfortable with at all.
No, I agree with that, of course, Lionel, but the problem is that images like that get beamed around the world, and it begins to seem not acceptable, but it's part of the tour, in the same way that sort of hooliganism became part of football for many years. As a culture develops, and it can start with it starts, I suppose, with isolated incidents like that.
Yeah, I suppose so, but what fans the flames of it? Is it giving it a wider publicity, or I don't want to sort of brush it under the carpet and pretend it hasn't.
No, but I think the way to curb this is for other fans on the mountain to challenge people or to take some kind of action. Even just actually photographing it and putting it out there is actually going to, I think, help to curb that.
Another theme of this Tour de France, but really it's been a theme of the last 5 years, has been the echo, the resonance given to every one of these tiny little stories by social media. And you imagine a situation like this a few years ago, someone had been seen on TV spitting, there'd been stories in the next day's press, but there would have been enough time in between it appearing in the press for it to diffuse itself or it to be overtaken by other events. And these stories, it's a bit like the Chris Froome suspicion, the doping suspicion. They really do snowball very, very quickly, don't they? And the social media is really driving the narrative and the agenda of the Tour de France now, and perhaps to an alarming extent. It's also very useful because it provides the checks and balances that journalists perhaps didn't have once upon a time, and it was also a great source of information. But I think we're all fighting a battle slightly over how much we should be influenced by it.
I was just going to pick up a point about Romain Bardet, who attacked to take King of the Mountains points. He's now in the polka dot jersey. Going to have a hard fight on the stage to Alpe d'Huez to keep that jersey, because he's only 3 points ahead of Chris Froome, and you've got to imagine that Froome will hoover up some points at the top of Alpe d'Huez. So it's not over for Bardet. He'll enjoy his day in a polka dot jersey, but he was trying, I think, to get up the road on the descent. And he had a mechanical problem as well. He had some kind of problem with his front derailleur, and he was bashing it with his foot. I mean, going downhill at sort of 70 kilometres an hour, 80 kilometres an hour, foot out of the pedal, trying to kick his front derailleur. And he had a 20, 30, 40 second advantage over the chasing group, which evaporated. At what point his misfortune was punished? He got hoovered up by the chasing group, and that was the end of it. So I think we've got to be really careful about how we say, well, is the yellow jersey completely immune from bad luck? I'm not sure that that's really how the race works.
No, absolutely. I think we are in agreement on that, Lionel. We were handed a piece of paper there, Daniel. What was it? Thomas Carriou, the former press man here, now performs another role for AS. So I just handed Daniel a piece of paper that says "God Save Bunting" on it.
Don't know what to make of that. This tour is increasingly leaving me completely baffled and bemused.
We have had sightings of a cycling podcast banner on the Col de Glandon yesterday. I'm not sure if it was seen today, but if any listeners of the cycling podcast are going to be on Alpe d'Huez tomorrow, we're going to look out for you on the way up. And I think Jonathan Rowe, our producer, who is doing a lot of tweeting for us and stuff, is trying to maybe even organise a little gathering on the way up Alpe d'Huez. That'd be nice. A little photo opportunity, perhaps.
That would be nice, wouldn't it? We'll drive up very slowly and honk our horn and wave in a...
We'll get Daniel to sit in the back and wave, will we? A bit like the Queen.
Just going back to Thomas Carriou, I think he's bereft slightly because he's no longer working quite as closely with Christian Prudhomme. Prudi, who of course featured in our Kilometre Zero this morning. I listened back to that a while ago. I really missed when I was talking to him. I really didn't pick up enough. I don't think on the stuff about the wolves, and I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's all fascinating, Daniel. I thought it was an excellent job, well done. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I recommend Daniel's Kilometre Zero with Christian Prudhomme.
That episode of Kilometre Zero is proving extremely popular. It's our 15th and final one from this Tour de France. I think we can say Kilometre Zero has been a success, and we will reprise it in the future.
Definitely.
Anyway, what do we think about Prudy's routes? Because I thought that the real test of Prudy's route was going to be these 2 days, and particularly whether Quintana had enough terrain to really give it a good go, perhaps turn things around. It was the diesel, which was Quintana, versus this sort of turbo engine of Froome's that had come to the fore very quickly in the Pyrenees. And I predicted earlier in the race that the pendulum would gradually swing towards Quintana. It has, but it's not swinging quickly or far enough, is it?
We should have mentioned the fact that Quintana did the elastic finally broke, and Quintana took about 30 seconds out of Chris Froome. It was exciting to see a gap opening up between them, but kind of knew it wasn't going to be quite enough?
It was all too late. I mean, I thought he was going to wait until Monday to launch his attack, once the tour's over. I mean, he sat there. And I think that the point you make there, Daniel, some of the stages, I think it's been a real attritional Tour de France. And it's easy for us to say, right, here's the two big grandstand alpine stages, short, sharp and explosive. Let's see some action right from the off. But I think they're just all too tired.
I've rarely seen riders as tired as they looked at the finish today, and even watching them during the stage, there was a moment where Valverde was off the front and he'd attacked, but it's like he's riding through treacle. I mean, there was no sort of finesse to it at all, no fluidity. Riders were really struggling, I think, and that's been interesting to see. A guy who did have a hard time today was Geraint Thomas, who I think even last night, his little interview with the podcast, said he'd been waiting for his bad day. He said after the finish he had hoped it would come on Monday, but he kept a sense of humour, and he was one of the few riders to stop and chat at the summit.
Just on Movistar, they haven't laid down arms yet, and I don't think they will necessarily tomorrow. But something I pointed out on Twitter earlier, something that we overlook, we don't really talk about enough, is that there is a very pragmatic element to all of this, and that is the bonuses, the financial bonuses that riders stand to earn for finishing, for example, second, third in the Tour de France. It is a life-changing amount of money for some of them. It's I was speaking to a few agents this morning, and they suggested the going rate for a podium finish, a bonus, is around 200,000 euros to 500,000 euros, possibly more in some cases. And while we might say,
what small change to us, isn't it?
Well, small change to us. But throw everything at it, go with the kitchen sink tomorrow. It must be in the back of riders' minds, if they know themselves that they've got very little chance of overthrowing Froome, of turning the situation around, then you probably would just sit tight.
And that's cash in your own pocket. That's not money that you're going to have to share with your teammates. It's personal bonus money, and obviously prize money is different. That tends to be shared with the teammates. But this is where the cycling as a team sport thing does break down a little, doesn't it? Because someone like Alejandro Valverde, well, the guys who are going for the final spot on the podium, of course that's going to be a huge motivation for them. And whereas Valverde could sacrifice himself in a bid to set something up for Quintana, this may well prevent him doing that.
And tomorrow, this is obviously something that we'll have to bear in mind again. How much are they prepared to risk? I personally think that Quintana will try to do what Carlos Sastre did at the Alpe d'Huez in 2008, and he'll try to go more or less from the bottom of Alpe d'Huez. The first kilometre of Alpe d'Huez is, I think, the steepest on Alpe d'Huez. It's a decent place to launch an attack. Pantani went there in 1998. 1997. But I don't think he has got a big enough attack in him to take back to 2 minutes, was it 40 seconds?
Shall we introduce one of our interviews? Well, we've been talking a little bit about Chris Froome, and you spoke to Robbie Hunter, who knows him from South African scene. Now, we have seen a different side of Froome this tour, I think, a more mature, more composed, but also we've seen a bit more of that assertiveness that people who know him well have always spoken about. But that's come to the fore, I think, a lot more in this tour. So let's hear from Robbie Hunter chatting to Lionel about Chris Froome.
Okay, Robbie Hunter, sports director with Cannondale-Garmin and a former teammate of both Geraint Thomas and Chris Froome from the Barloworld days. Geraint Thomas, first of all, you rode the Tour in 2007, Robbie, when Geraint was making his debut as a 21-year-old, I think he was. Possibly a little unfair maybe to say that he was selected because he was British and the Grand Depart was in London. What do you think?
I'd have to say I think you're totally wrong on that. He was young, but he was a massive talent back then. I mean, Geraint did some, helped me with a couple of lead-outs previously in the year, and my impression was that he belonged there because he was a fantastic rider.
Back in 2007, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think you won in Montpellier. Is that right? That was that year. Did Geraint play any kind of role in the sprint that day?
Unfortunately not. I mean, it was Geraint's first. It was his first tour. He helped me out on a number of occasions, but that day wasn't one of them. And we had a lot of guys who kind of got caught. Well, half the peloton got caught out, in the wind going into the feed zone, and there was a number of the team that ended up swapping off thereafter, to get us to the line, make sure the group didn't come back. But Unfortunately, Geraint was one of the guys that was caught out in the wind. But I mean, like I said, those were his early days. I'm pretty sure that wouldn't happen these days.
Were you you were a bit more experienced then, one of the more experienced guys in the team. Were you kind of nursing him through a little bit, particularly towards the end? Because it was a real in at the deep end experience for him at that age.
Well, I definitely was, and I think, I like to think I, hopefully gave him one or two bits of advice along the way that, helped him get through the race. There was 1 or 2 days that he really, really struggled. But I think there was never really a doubt in his mind, that he wanted to stop the race or couldn't get to Paris. Obviously, like I said, there was definitely one day that I know he really didn't enjoy. He was out the back all day on his own. But it was never up for discussion as to whether he was going to get off his bike, and that's the kind of character he has. He sticks things out and he fights all the way.
Move on to Chris Froome quickly. Obviously, he was brought up in South Africa. Did your paths cross at all when he was growing up and getting into cycling, or not at all?
Honestly, very, very little. Chris was the kind of rider that, unfortunately, in South Africa, never gets noticed. I'd seen Chris around, when I was back home, in the off season. Honestly, I never really spoke to him back then, and I can't say we were friends when we grew up, but not at all, because there was a bit of an age gap, and I was racing in Europe already. So, honestly, the first time that I'd really say I probably spoke to Chris was actually I phoned him up not long after he won in Giro alla Regione, and I said to him that I thought it was possibly a really good opportunity to try and get onto Barloworld. That was probably the first time I really spoke to Chris.
And so you rode the Tour with him in 2008 with Barloworld. What were your impressions of him then?
He was a bit of a mess on a bike back then, but he had this engine, and he's always had it.
He had a good Tour that year. He's a very polite man. He's always answered the questions in the press conferences every day with patience and politeness. It strikes me he's got a heart of steel. Is that something that you'd agree with?
Well, I think he's an intelligent person. He lets very little get under his skin and irritate him, and honestly, that's a true sign of an absolute professional. And there's a lot of people out there who possibly couldn't react to some of the questions that the press put to them, and they react very differently. And honestly, again, absolute professionalism, the way Chris has handled all kinds of situations in the past couple of years since he's been at the top of the world in world cycling.
In terms of the questions he's had to answer about his power output and all of that, what's the attitude that you have towards that? Is there anything, is there an amber flag against Chris Froome in this Tour de France at all?
Honestly, I know Chris Froome from way back then. I think he's got a massive engine, and if someone else wants to discuss that and lay something out in the press, that's their decision. Chris has always played, from what I've seen, he's done what he can to try and prove that he's out there to try and race in the right way, and I see no reason why people should be discussing these kinds of things.
Lastly, on Chris, then, is there anything from that 2008 Tour, any stories that stick out in your mind about Chris that you can share with our listeners? You're smiling like you're editing.
No, not at all. It's just so difficult. It's a long time ago, and I'm getting older. Trying to think anything. On the bike, there's nothing really that I can think of that that stands out. He used to grow beans in his suitcase. That's all I can remember.
What kind of beans in his suitcase?
I can't really remember. He used to have a test tube that used to grow beans in his suitcase that he'd chuck on his salad at night. That's all I can remember. That's the only thing.
Well, I can hear people's reaction to that already. The exclusive news that Chris Froome grows magic beans in a test tube, and maybe that's the answer to his incredible development as a professional cyclist.
Maybe he started life as a magic bean grown in a test tube himself. That might explain a few things. Maybe he's trying to grow his own clone.
Grow a new Chris Froome.
Extraordinary stuff you hear on the cycling podcast, isn't it?
It's absolutely groundbreaking stuff. Okay, on that note, let's have today's Peddler de Charme.
And now, le Pédaleur de Charme, supported by British Eurosport.
Okay, today's British Eurosport Peddler de Charme. Who will it be? We got the T-shirt to winner Anacona this morning. He looked absolutely nonplussed to receive the Peddler de Charme T-shirt. Lionel?
This is the first real year of the Peddler de Charme as an entity, as something with a jersey. I mean,
It's not the first real year, it's the first year.
well, we've done Peddler de Charme before in the past.
Oh, sorry, we have.
But we haven't awarded a jersey. We'll be doing a gallery, a roll of honour at the end of the tour on the website, thecyclingpodcast.com, and that will stay there forever. It's a bit like the 1904 Tour de France nearly didn't happen, you know. The Tour de France took a while to bed in. Yeah, Orme de Grange was going to not bother because of all the cheating in the first edition. But the Peddler de Charme, you know, in 10
It's
years
here to
time,
stay.
In 10 years' time, it will be one of the more. It will be better than the Prix de Combativité, that's for sure.
I think it'll be moving up the pecking order in terms of the jerseys. It'll probably be in between polka dots and pink and green. Sorry, pink's the Giro.
What about the polka dot jersey? And I hate to interrupt things, but the polka dot jersey, it's hotting up, isn't it?
Yeah, shall we give it to Romain Bardet for taking polka dot jersey today?
What? Okay.
Peddler de Charme.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he could have won it the previous day for his stage win, but we overruled that. So
There were a lot of nominations for Wout Poels, Froome's helper in the mountains.
yeah. No, let's go for Romain Bardet.
Romain Bardet.
Yeah. What about Vincenzo Nibali for looking around just to make absolutely sure that Chris Froome was experiencing mechanical problems before he attacked? I was very considerate of him.
I'll tell you what, let's do two. So, let's do two because we've got a surplus of T-shirts thanks to Daniel's inability to present them to certain riders. One of whom has now gone home from the tour, Michał Kwiatkowski, destined to that'll be in the history books. That'll be a little footnote in history books, won't it? Which it'll be a pub quiz. You know, which rider at the 2015 Tour de France was named Peddler de Charme but could never be given his T-shirt. Michał Kwiatkowski. Anyway, so Romain Bardet and Vincenzo Nibali are our two Peddlers de Charme. Don't tell Chris Froome. Okay, finally tonight in our third last podcast of the Tour de France. Second last, is it, or third last? Third last.
Yeah, we're going all the way to Paris.
We're going to Paris. We're actually gonna have a little review podcast going out some point next week for friends of the podcast. Sign up at thecyclingpodcast.com, become a friend for £5, and quite a few have been becoming friends recently. Maybe that's to listen to our perk, which is our latest one, which is all about doping cycling. It's over 2 hours long, so set aside some time for that. But yeah, our review will be coming next week for friends of the podcast, and that'll be largely me and Lionel driving up to Paris, and we'll have a little bit of Daniel in there as well. Hey Daniel.
Yep.
Okay, Lionel, to finish tonight, let's hear from Oleg Tinkoff. Introduce your interview with him, please.
Well, yeah, Tinkoff's been on the race a couple of blocks, wasn't he? He was here towards the start, and he's come back in recent days. We saw him out on the road riding his bike, and he was around this morning, gave a few interviews to TV, and I just caught him as he was walking up towards the start line, and I just wanted to pick his brains about a few things. So here is the owner and boss of Tinkoff-Saxo, the Russian gazillionaire, Oleg Tinkoff. Excuse me, Oleg, what do you think the Tour de France will look like in 10 years' time?
Still great event, nice event, but it will be more like a Formula 1 league rather than a championship. It will be much more private, much more commercial, and much more interesting to see on TV, better televised. More technology will be involved. I see it this way, more modern way.
So do you think that the teams, instead of being dependent on sponsors, will become more like, say, an American football franchise?
Yeah, I believe so. That's the only way to survive for cycling. Because I believe that 30-40% of the teams that are participating in this Tour de France will be not here in 2017. They will be closed, disbanded, and lost the sponsorship and income.
Do you think there are too many teams and that the best riders?
Yeah, that's what I said to Jan Lemonet when I met him the other day. I said, you have to reduce it to 18. I don't see any reason with speed bumps and roundabout in France to have so many riders. Why we have 200 riders? It should be 140 riders or something like that.
Did you have a meeting with Christian Prudhomme earlier this week?
No. He never talked to me. I never talked to him. So no.
How much of a part in the future of cycling is ASO, though, because they own the biggest race?
I think they will continue to dominate the business, but they will start to understand that they need to share with the teams.
And what about the smaller races like Paris-Nice, Tirreno-Adriatico?
Way, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah, Tirreno-Adriatico, Paris-Nice, the smaller races. Do you think they have a place in the future, or is?
I think so. Why not? They have to be in the calendar, but I think those kind of teams, the races, they have a place to be. The smaller races, they need to be separated. But such a Tirreno-Adriatic, it's a huge race. It needs to be in that calendar.
And lastly, Sky have been under pressure a little bit because they have their luxury mobile homes. Dave Brailsford is living in a luxury mobile home. What do you think of this whole issue? Because you're a very rich man and you come to the Tour de France and you see your team staying in some hotels that are not the sort of places that you would want to stay.
I'm jealous to Dave Brailsford because I've been staying myself in that Gap, stupid, cheap Best Western, where it was plus 35, and actually I've been with my son in tiny 20 square meters room with my 15-year-old son. We shared the room, we sweat together. But I don't care about that. I'm okay that Alberto Contador, Peter Sagan and the other riders, after 6 years of riding, they have been sweating in that room. Definitely the quality of the Tour de France hotel need to be rising up, and I'm glad for Dave. If he afford to stay in motorhome, there's nothing wrong with it, and I'm jealous.
Okay. My very last question then, what about the Tour de France as a competition this year? Because Chris Froome has really been in control from the start. For spectators who want a really close fight, it perhaps hasn't been the most enjoyable spectacle for the casual spectators. For the hardcore cycling fans, yes, but...
As I said, would have been nicer if they all come to Giro, and then it would have been nice fights. Because Alberto, as you can understand how strong he is, if after Giro he's still competing and fighting with Chris and the other riders. Obviously that we miss Alberto Contador attacks, big attacks. He still keep attacking, but because he would been tired at the Giro.
Do you think it was a mistake for him to do the Giro, even though he won it?
It was not a mistake. We knew it's a risk. We took that risk with open mind, and it's not a mistake. It's just, that's what it is. And we try. At least we try. It didn't work, yes. No, so we come back next year directly and try to win it. And I really believe that Alberto is able to win Tour de France.
And Peter Sagan, he's won the green jersey, barring an accident now, we would think. He's been very impressive in this race. He hasn't won a stage. What's his future? Is it with Tinkoff-Saxo?
Yeah, definitely. He will be with us. It's the most valuable rider in the sport. And I think he does a lot of promotion, not only for Tinkoff-Saxo, but he does a lot of promotion for cycling in general. For me, it's a pleasure to have such a rider.
Excellent. Thank you, Oleg. Thank you.
So you heard there from Oleg Tinkoff to finish off tonight's podcast. No doubt some of the points he raises will be ones that we return to.
Yeah, I think maybe one of our friends' specials later in the year, we ought to put our heads together. And I know you've written about this, Daniel, in a more sort of jokey type way, what the future of cycling might look like in 10 years' time. But perhaps we ought to come up with a blueprint for the future of cycling and get suggestions from some of our listeners.
Absolutely, we will do that. But for the moment, Daniel, sorry, you've got something to say?
My future involves a meeting with Oleg Tinkoff in about 10 minutes, so I've got to go.
All right, well, let's wrap up for tonight. Lionel, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
For the best analysis, discussions and interviews from the 2015 Tour de France, listen to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast, supported by Jaguar.